Professor David Mitchell had examined thousands of early 20th century photographs during his 20-year career at the National Archives, but nothing had prepared him for what he discovered on that foggy Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C. The photograph had arrived as part of a routine donation from the Riverside Historical Society in Connecticut, ABE, seemingly ordinary family portrait from 1900 that appeared to show a prosperous American family posing in their parlor. The image depicted a classic Victorian family, a distinguished gentleman with a meticulously groomed mustache, his wife in an elaborate dark dress with intricate beadwork, and their 3 children arranged formally beside them. The 2 boys, appearing to be around 8 and 10 years old, stood stiffly in their Sunday best, while a young girl of perhaps 6 sat demurely on a small stool, her hands folded in her lap. At first glance, everything seemed perfectly normal, the kind of formal family portrait that graced countless American homes at the turn of the century. The lighting was professional, the composition carefully arranged, and the subject's expressions appropriately solemn for the long exposure times required by 1900s photography equipment. But when Professor Mitchell used his high-powered magnifying glass to examine the photograph more closely for archival cataloging purposes, he noticed something that made him pause. The little girl's eyes contained something deeply unsettling, not a reflection or photographic anomaly, but an expression of terror that seemed far too mature and knowing for a 6-year-old child. Under magnification, her pupils were dilated in a way that suggested extreme fear or distress, and her gaze seemed to be focused on something beyond the camera's view. Most disturbing of all, Professor Mitchell could detect what appeared to be bruising around her left eye, carefully concealed with powder but still visible under close examination. Professor Mitchell's initial instinct was to dismiss what he saw as tricks of light or the natural imperfections of early photography. However, the more he studied the photograph under various magnifications and lighting conditions, the more convinced he became that he was looking at evidence of something far more sinister than a simple family portrait. He called his colleague, Dr. Sarah Chen, a specialist in photographic analysis and historical crime evidence. When she arrived at his laboratory that afternoon, her expertise in detecting concealed evidence in historical photographs provided crucial perspective. "David, I've analyzed hundreds of photographs for signs of abuse or violence," she said, adjusting the high-powered microscope to examine the girl's face. "What you're seeing here is consistent with deliberate concealment of physical trauma. Under extreme magnification, additional disturbing details emerged. The girl's clothing, while expensive and well-fitted, showed subtle signs of having been recently adjusted, threads that didn't match, seams that had been hastily repaired, and fabric that appeared to have been cleaned to remove stains. Most telling were faint marks on her neck, partially hidden by her high collar but visible under enhanced lighting. This child has been physically abused," Dr. Chen concluded grimly. "The bruising patterns, the concealment techniques, and most importantly, that expression of trapped terror, these are all classic indicators of ongoing domestic violence. Someone went to great lengths to make her appear normal for this photograph." Professor Mitchell felt a chill as he realized they weren't just looking at a historical curiosity, but potential evidence of a crime that had been hidden for over a century. The formal family portrait, meant to project prosperity and happiness, was actually documenting a child's suffering. The question now was, who in this respectable Victorian family was responsible for Emily's abuse? The trail led Professor Mitchell and Dr. Chen to the small town of Riverside, Connecticut, where the photograph had originated. The Riverside Historical Society occupied a charming Victorian building on Main Street, but their investigation into the Thornfield family revealed a much darker reality beneath the town's genteel facade. Mrs. Eleanor Whitman, the society's elderly curator, welcomed them but grew visibly uncomfortable when they inquired specifically about Emily Thornfield. "The Thornfield family was very prominent in town," she said carefully, "but there were rumors, whispers that not everything was as perfect as it appeared. Research into local newspaper archives revealed a pattern of concerning incidents involving the Thornfield household. Several servants had left their employment abruptly without explanation. The local doctor had made numerous visits to the house, often during odd hours. Most telling were the carefully worded society notices that mentioned Emily's frequent illnesses that kept her away from public events and social gatherings. Dr. Chen discovered something particularly disturbing in the records of Riverside's small police department. In 1901, just 1 year after the photograph was taken, a servant named Margaret O'Sullivan had reported irregularities in the treatment of the youngest Thornfield child to the local constable. However, her complaint had been dismissed without investigation, and she had been quietly dismissed from her position shortly afterward. The Thornfield name carried enormous weight in this town, Mrs. Whitman admitted reluctantly. Charles Thornfield owned the largest textile mill and employed half the town. Anyone who spoke against the family found themselves without work or facing other difficulties. The family's wealth and influence had effectively silenced anyone who might have tried to protect Emily, leaving her trapped in a household where her suffering was carefully hidden from public view. Professor Mitchell's search for Margaret O'Sullivan led him to the Irish immigrant records at the Boston Immigration Center, where he discovered that the former Thornfield servant had eventually settled in South Boston and lived until 1952. More importantly, her granddaughter still lived in the area and had preserved her grandmother's personal papers, including a detailed account of what she had witnessed in the Thornfield household. Margaret O'Sullivan's written testimony, never officially recorded, but preserved by her family, painted a horrifying picture of systematic abuse within one of Connecticut's most respected families. The little girl Emily was treated worse than an animal, she had written in 1901. Her own mother would lock her in the cellar for days as punishment for the smallest infractions. The father showed no interest in protecting her, caring only for his business and reputation. The account detailed specific incidents of physical violence, emotional manipulation, and deliberate isolation that Emily had endured. Most heartbreaking were O'Sullivan's descriptions of the child's desperate attempts to be good enough to earn her mother's love, never understanding that nothing she did would ever be sufficient. Mrs. Thornfield had a terrible temper and took out all her frustrations on poor Emily, O'Sullivan had written. She would beat the child for crying, then beat her again for not showing proper affection afterward. The little one learned to smile and curtsy even when she was in terrible pain, because any sign of distress would only bring more punishment. Dr. Chen realized that this explained the chilling expression they had observed in Emily's eyes during the family portrait. The child had been forced to pose for the photograph shortly after being abused, required to maintain the facade of a happy family, while terrified of the consequences of any show of fear or pain. Margaret O'Sullivan's final entry about Emily was prophetic and tragic. "I fear for that child's life. If someone doesn't intervene soon, Mrs. Thornfield's cruelty will escalate beyond what even a strong child can survive." Further investigation into Margaret Thornfield revealed a pattern of psychological instability and violent behavior that had been carefully concealed by the family's wealth and social standing. Medical records from a private sanatorium in Massachusetts showed that Margaret had been treated for what early 20th century physicians termed nervous disorders and hysterical episodes on multiple occasions. Dr. Chen consulted with Dr. Rebecca Torres, a modern psychologist specializing in historical cases of child abuse, to understand Margaret Thornfield's behavior patterns. The evidence suggests a textbook case of what we now recognize as narcissistic personality disorder with severe anger management issues, Dr. Torres explained. The mother likely viewed Emily as an extension of herself, becoming enraged whenever the child failed to meet impossible standards. The psychological dynamics were further revealed through correspondence found in the Thornfield estate papers. Margaret's letters to her sister in Boston contained disturbing references to Emily as willful, defiant, and requiring constant correction. The language revealed a mother who viewed normal childhood behavior as deliberate attempts to embarrass or challenge her authority. Most chilling was a letter dated just 2 weeks before the family portrait was taken. Emily continues to test my patience with her dramatic displays of emotion. I have had to be quite firm in teaching her proper comportment. She must learn that tears and pleading will not save her from the consequences of her behavior. A child who cannot control herself requires a mother who will control her completely. Professor Mitchell realized that the family portrait had likely been scheduled immediately following one of Margaret's correction sessions. forcing Emily to pose while still bearing the physical and emotional trauma of recent abuse. The photograph captured not just a moment in time, but evidence of ongoing torture disguised as maternal discipline. The wealth and social standing that should have protected Emily had instead become tools for her mother's abuse, providing the privacy and authority necessary to systematically destroy a child's spirit while maintaining a respectable public facade. Professor Mitchell's investigation expanded to include other members of the Thornfield household and community who might have witnessed Emily's abuse. What he discovered was a conspiracy of silence maintained through fear, economic dependence, and social pressure that allowed the abuse to continue unchecked for years. The family's other servants, tracked through employment records and immigration documents, painted a consistent picture of a household ruled by fear. Those who had worked for the Thornfields longest had learned to look away, focus on their duties, and never acknowledge what they witnessed happening to Emily. The alternative was unemployment and blacklisting from other positions in the area. Dr. Chen uncovered testimony from Dr. Harrison Webb, the family physician, preserved in his personal medical journals. Webb had clearly suspected abuse, but felt powerless to act against such a prominent family. Young Emily Thornfield presents with injuries consistent with physical chastisement, he had written in 1900, but the family's explanations are plausible, and my position does not permit direct confrontation with clients of such standing. Even Emily's brothers, then 8 and 10 years old, had been conditioned to accept their sister's treatment as normal family discipline. Letters they wrote as adults to their own children revealed the psychological damage of growing up in such a household. Mother was very strict with Emily, perhaps overly so, but we understood that girls required different handling than boys. The most heartbreaking evidence came from Emily's own attempts to seek help. A note found hidden in the walls during renovation of the old Thornfield house revealed a child's desperate plea. "Please help me. Mama gets angry and I don't know why. I try to be good, but it's never enough. I'm scared all the time." The note was addressed to no one in particular. Emily had apparently hidden it, hoping that someday someone would find it and understand what she had endured. It had taken over a century for that hope to be fulfilled. The investigation took a dark turn when Professor Mitchell discovered evidence that Margaret Thornfield's abuse of Emily had escalated dramatically in the months following the family portrait. Medical records and witness accounts suggested that by late 1901, the situation had reached a crisis point that would determine whether Emily survived her childhood. Dr. Harrison Webb's medical journals revealed increasingly frequent calls to the Thornfield household throughout 1901. His coded entries suggested serious injuries that went far beyond normal childhood accidents. Called to attend Emily T., extensive bruising to torso and limbs, family attributes to fall downstairs, child exhibits signs of severe psychological distress. Margaret O'Sullivan's account, continued in letters to her sister in Ireland, documented the escalation. The mistress has grown worse since the photograph was taken. She seems to blame little Emily for everything that goes wrong in the house. Yesterday, she locked the child in the root cellar for an entire day without food because Emily had torn her dress while playing. The breaking point came in December 1901, when Emily's injuries became too severe to conceal. Dr. Webb's final entry about treating Emily was stark in its implications. Child presence with broken ribs and severe head trauma. Family claims accidental fall, but injury patterns suggest deliberate violence. I have reached the limits of what my professional ethics can allow me to ignore. It was at this moment that an unexpected intervention occurred. Charles Thornfield's elderly aunt, Constance Thornfield, arrived for an extended visit and immediately recognized the signs of abuse that the rest of the family and community had chosen to ignore. Unlike the servants and neighbors, Constance possessed both the social standing and financial independence necessary to challenge Margaret's treatment of Emily. The confrontation between Constance and Margaret, documented in family letters, marked the beginning of Emily's salvation, but it had come almost too late. Constance Thornfield's intervention represented Emily's first real protection in her young life. At 72 years old, Charles's aunt possessed the moral courage and social authority that had been lacking in everyone else who witnessed Emily's abuse. Her immediate action following her December 1901 visit probably saved Emily's life. Constance's letters to her lawyer in Boston, preserved in legal archives, revealed her shock at Emily's condition and her determination to remove the child from immediate danger. "I found my great niece in a state that no civilized person could ignore. The child is clearly terrified of her own mother and bears physical evidence of systematic abuse. I am taking immediate action to ensure her safety." Using her considerable influence as a member of one of New England's oldest families, Constance arranged for Emily to be removed from the household under the pretext of requiring specialized medical treatment for her injuries. This face-saving explanation allowed the Thornfield family to maintain their reputation, while Emily received the protection she desperately needed. Dr. Chen discovered records from a private children's rehabilitation facility in Vermont, where Emily was taken for recovery. The medical reports documented not only her physical injuries, broken ribs, chronic malnutrition, and evidence of repeated head trauma, but also the psychological damage that would require years to heal. Patient exhibits extreme anxiety around adult women, the facility's doctor noted, and demonstrates hypervigilance consistent with ongoing trauma. She apologizes constantly for normal childhood behaviors and seems genuinely surprised when treated with kindness. Recovery will require extensive time and patience. Constance Thornfield had not only rescued Emily, but had also ensured that the child would receive proper medical care and psychological support. For the first time in her life, Emily was in an environment where her safety and well-being were the primary concerns. The rehabilitation records from the Vermont facility provided a detailed account of Emily's gradual healing over the next 3 years. Dr. Martha Henley, who specialized in treating traumatized children, documented Emily's slow journey from a terrified, damaged child to a young girl capable of experiencing joy and security. Emily arrived presenting classic symptoms of complex trauma, Dr. Henley had written in 1902. She was underweight, hypervigilant, and exhibited severe attachment difficulties. Most concerning was her belief that she deserved the treatment she had received and her desperate attempts to be perfect to avoid further punishment. The recovery process was documented through monthly reports that showed both progress and setbacks. Emily had to learn basic concepts that most children take for granted, that adults could be trusted, that mistakes didn't warrant physical punishment, and that she had inherent worth regardless of her behavior. Professor Mitchell found particular meaning in a report from 1903. Emily has begun to laugh spontaneously and engage in normal childhood play. She still apologizes excessively and shows anxiety when meeting new people, but the constant fear that characterized her early months here has significantly diminished. By 1904, Emily had progressed enough to begin formal education with other children at the facility. Her intelligence, undamaged by the abuse, quickly became apparent as she excelled in her studies. More importantly, she began forming friendships with other children and learning to trust the adults who cared for her. Constance Thornfield visited regularly and had become Emily's legal guardian, ensuring that the child would never again be subjected to her mother's abuse. The old woman's dedication to Emily's healing demonstrated the power of one person's moral courage to transform a child's entire future. Standing in the Riverside Cemetery, where a small headstone marked Emily Thornfield's grave, Professor Mitchell reflected on how his investigation had uncovered not just a crime, but also a remarkable story of survival and redemption. Emily had lived until 1954, dying peacefully at the age of 60, having overcome the trauma of her early childhood to build a meaningful life. The investigation had revealed that Emily had indeed survived and thrived despite her horrific start in life. After completing her education at the Vermont facility, she had become a teacher, dedicating her life to protecting and nurturing children who, like herself, needed advocates and champions. Emily's own writings, discovered among her papers, provided insight into how she had processed her childhood trauma. I learned that survival requires not just escaping abuse, but choosing to build something better from the pieces left behind. Every child I taught was an opportunity to demonstrate the care and kindness I wished I had received. The case had far-reaching implications beyond historical curiosity. Professor Mitchell worked with child protection advocates to document how wealth and social status had been used to silence witnesses and enable abuse, patterns that unfortunately continued in modern times. Emily's story became part of training, materials for social workers and law enforcement officers. Most importantly, Emily's survival and success provided hope for contemporary survivors of child abuse. Her transformation from a terrified, damaged child into a respected educator and advocate demonstrated the human capacity for healing and growth even after severe trauma. The family photograph that had started the investigation now resided in a specialized archive documenting historical cases of child abuse and recovery. It served not as a curiosity, but as evidence of both human cruelty and human resilience. Margaret Thornfield had died in 1920, having never acknowledged or atoned for her treatment of Emily. But Emily herself had created a legacy of protection and care that far outlasted her mother's cruelty. She had broken the cycle of abuse and spent her life ensuring that other children would be protected and valued. Professor Mitchell left a bouquet of flowers on Emily's grave, honoring both her survival and her transformation of personal trauma into a lifetime of service to others. Her story proved that even in the darkest circumstances, human courage and compassion could prevail, creating hope and healing where once there had been only suffering.